It is Thursday, and it is the AIR B&B Brett and Brendan Sports Hour podcast here at SAIT Campus Radio. Obviously, I am Brendan, and as always, I am joined by my good friend Brett. How you doing today, man?
Oh, I'm doing great. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about today, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of really good stuff to talk about here today. First off, I want to jump right into the Formula One news that broke earlier this morning, or what was it, last night or earlier?
I think it was overnight.
Overnight, yeah. Which is the Las Vegas is getting a Grand Prix in 2023. It's going to be a Saturday night race. It's going to be a night race, so obviously a little bit of difference there, but it's going to be Saturday night instead of Sunday. But I know both of our thoughts, but tell me what you think about it.
Well, I mean, this is going to be the first Saturday night Grand Prix in almost 40 years, which is pretty astounding for F1. You haven't heard of anything like that in such a long time. It's going to be an absolutely crazy race, I think. It's only 14 turns. It's 6K. It is going to be fast. According to the F1 article I read earlier today on F1's website, they're comparing the top speeds to that of Monza, which is...
That's huge.
It's known as one of the fastest tracks on the F1 circuit. And it's going to be really interesting it's going to be quite the experience to have prime time Saturday night auto racing in North America, and it's something we haven't had the luxury of because we're constantly, out here in North America having to wake up at 6, 7 a.m. to watch most F1 races. So I'm very excited, but I'm going to lead you into this one. But yeah, 3 races in the USA next year slated now. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I like all 3 events. Obviously, we are getting Miami this year, and that's coming up here in the next couple of races. And so I'm really excited to see how that Grand Prix actually goes, because obviously we haven't raced Miami. But I think 3 is definitely a little excessive, just simply because, most of the time if we have a country do 2 races, or if we have a country have multiple races, it's only ever 2. And now the fact that America... which is a country that is not necessarily known for Formula One. Obviously, America is more of a NASCAR type a country. But, the fact that they have 3, it's really, really interesting. And the fact that they're all very, very different times of the year. Like, obviously, we're going to have Miami, which is closer to the start. And then we have Austin, which is closer to the end of the season. And, then we're going to be right back in Vegas, which is... obviously, it's going to be November. So I think it might be a little excessive. I think the best course of action is maybe to see how Miami goes and then to, kind of either replace Miami with Las Vegas. I do think it's a little excessive. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, like you mentioned, it's very rare that you see any country hosting more than one Grand Prix with the exception of Italy. I mean, they have the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix and then they have Monza every year. And I mean, even in previous years, they weren't even calling the Romagna Grand Prix. They were calling it the San Marino Grand Prix. They were trying to really get away. They always liked naming them after countries. And then obviously with COVID, you had back-to-back weeks in Austria. They would have races and things like that, and they were doubling up in a lot of cities. But, I mean, this is going to be... I mean, are they going to lose a track next year? Like, are they going to try to remove one of the other cities from the circuit next year? Because this is already a 23 race season, which is insane. And then they just keep adding more and more locations and races to the schedule. And, I'm not really surprised to see F1 trying to capitalize on the momentum that Drive to Survive has brought to the American audience for F1. And they want to really try to capture the market out here, and I'm not surprised they're doing it, but I guess we'll see. And I'm definitely really excited for Miami, which is going to be May 8th. We got a couple more races to go before we get there. We have Australia coming up next on April 10th, sorry, is the race, and then we're going to have a couple weeks off. Then we go back to the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix up in northern Italy, and then we're coming back all the way to the U.S. just to go to Miami, which is going to be something I'm very curious to see with it being a new track.
Yeah, and, just saying exactly what you said there, like how much travel there's going to be. Obviously they're going to Australia next week. They were in Saudi Arabia this past weekend, which is something that we're going to talk about. But yeah, just the sheer amount of traveling, because they are going to have to go from, like what you said, from Saudi Arabia to Australia. Then they're going to be going back into Italy. And then, I think there's a couple races in between Imola or the Northern Italy race and then Miami. But even then, like if you're traveling from Italy to Miami, that is a massive jump. And then I wonder, are they going back? I don't have the actual schedule in front of me. Are they going back to Europe and then coming back to Canada, or are they kind of taking like that summer break? Like what's do you have the schedule in front of you?
Yeah, I do. It's a little bit wild right now, but yeah, they are taking a travel week between each race. But yeah, it's the 10th is Australia, then they get a week off, then they're in Italy for Imola, and then they get another week off, and then they come to the U.S. Then they go Spain, Monaco, Baku, then they come to Canada in June. So June race in Montreal, that's actually quite a bit later on the schedule than it normally is. It's round 9. Normally it's
round 6.
Normally it's round 6 right before they go to Monaco. So yeah, they've really adjusted everything around here. And then after Canada, normally France comes right after Canada, but then they're doing Silverstone, Austria, France, Hungary. Then they're doing pretty much all of the European races there in a row. So it's going to, and then Singapore's back this year, which is also, I know that's one of my girlfriend's favorite tracks, so she's very excited about that. But yeah, a lot of races this year. But let's talk about the one that happened last Sunday, because that was some riveting action.
Yeah, I kind of looked at that race there, and I would say the start of the race was really, really exciting. And then normally with Formula One, the start of the race always really, really exciting. Then kind of the middle portion of it kind of gets a little boring. And then for the really, really good races, we see the last 10, 15 laps really, really pick up in intensity. And that's exactly what we saw this weekend. The start of the race was super exciting. The middle, I was kind of lying back in my chair going oh, are we in for a bit of a boring race here? Because it really kind of felt like we were leaning that way. And then the last 10 laps, I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, because obviously, we had Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc battling it out. And, they were playing a game of DRS chicken from one tweet that I saw that I really liked. And it was really, really interesting to see that strategy. But I love the way that the cars are set up this year and all the rule changes, because they said they wanted to have this era of Formula One cars, be more competitive. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And, it's not going to be one of those things where one car just gets the DRS and zooms past the other. And it's well, okay, now, that car that was passed, they're going to have to wait 2 or 3 laps to get their opportunity back. It's corner after corner. If there's an opportunity, you really, really got to pick it out. And these drivers are having to think a lot more. And it was honestly one of the more exciting races I've seen in a long time. I compared this race to actually France last year, which was, we always go into France going, this is going to be a boring race. But last year's race was just so intense and amazing. That obviously that's one of the ones that stuck out to me. And this race, I think, is probably going to be one of those races at the end of the year that I'm still going to be thinking about because of just how intense it was.
Yeah, it was full of drama this last weekend. We talk a lot about Saudi Arabia and how fast it is, and you mentioned the DRS chicken, and you could definitely tell that, especially in those last few laps, Verstappen was trying to wait for his moment, and he was specifically trying to wait for that home straight to get to that start-finish line, to really wait for that moment to use his DRS to get past Leclerc. And we talked about the fact that, it didn't look like we were going to get a lot of excitement at the end. It definitely felt for about 15, 20 laps that Leclerc was just kind of managing the gap between him and Verstappen. And I thought, Leclerc's got this in the bag, and it doesn't look very good for Max right now because he just can't seem to close in. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, he's right on his tail. And these cars this year are able to follow each other so closely, and it has made the sport so much more exciting this year. We talked so much about last year's cars and just they couldn't drive close behind one another, you had to stay about a second and a half back, and then that puts you out of DRS range, and then it makes it so much harder to overtake. So this year has just been so much better, but I mean, absolutely gutted for Sergio Perez.
Yeah, I hear you, man.
Oh, man. Yeah. That was his first ever pole. He's won 2 career races. He looked like he was on his way to an easy 3rd career win. He was managing it really well, but then Leclerc was, and Ferrari played a little bit of some mind games there. They told Leclerc to box to overtake, and then when Sergio went in, Leclerc stayed out, and then all of a sudden, it's the Canadian there, Nicholas Latifi, has a little bit of a spin out there and runs into the wall, causes a safety car, and just like that, Perez is 1st to 4th and could never recover that.
Yeah, even with those mind games from Ferrari and, Sergio Perez coming in, we always talk about Perez being the king of tire management. And even if that safety car didn't happen, I still think Perez would have been first. I think he was driving a perfect race. He really, really was. And ultimately, I think it was just simply that safety car that ended up screwing him over for that, because he was driving a perfect race. And even with, Ferrari playing those mind games, I still think Perez would have, the undercut would have worked. I don't even think it's an undercut necessarily.
Right.
It was just one of those situations where it was like, okay, well, Ferrari's doing this, might as well go in. It might have just been simply that was Red Bull's plan all along, just because we don't really know necessarily all the time what the strategies are going to be. But yeah, I really think Perez just kind of got screwed over by that safety car. And unfortunately for the Canadian Nicholas Latifi, 2nd week in a row that he's caused a crash for himself. You feel bad for him because this year was supposed to be his year to really ascend and take off, because he's not in the shadow of George Russell anymore. And, last year we saw a lot of improvement from Nicholas Latifi, and, it's really unfortunate to see what's been happening to him this year. But the crash that I want to talk about is, unfortunately, Mick Schumacher's, which was just a horrific crash. If you saw the car afterwards, it was just totaled. They were actually putting it onto they were trying to put it on the back of a skid car, and you could just see it crumbling in half.
Right.
And you're like, oh my God, we just hope he's okay. And luckily for Mick that he was okay. And, the commentators said it best. It was the car looks completely crumpled and crashed and just absolutely destroyed, but that's a good thing, because that means the car took most of the impact.
Exactly.
And, Mick, he was okay. Unfortunately for Haas, that's going to be over $1 million in repair costs. It's a tough one. And you know what? That's the 2nd time that Mick has ever driven the Saudi Arabia track, and that's the 2nd time he's crashed out. Yeah,
you definitely have to feel bad for Mick. Thank goodness he's okay.
Yeah.
But, I had him pegged to get some points this week, and, the Haas car was looking good. It was he was doing really well there going into into Q2, and he was looking fairly strong. But I mean, you got to feel bad for Mick. I hope he's going to be ready to go in Australia. He should be. But yeah, only 14 cars finished the race. It was a bit of an issue for engine troubles, kind of all across the board. We had Fernando Alonso and Daniel Ricciardo both their engines dying on opposite ends of the pit lane almost simultaneously.
Yeah.
And it was one of those wild races where you really didn't know what was going to happen. Didn't really affect much at the top, as you had the Red Bulls, the Ferraris, and then George Russell right behind him, and that's kind of the top 5 we're almost kind of expecting at this point. Lando Norris finally gets some points this season, gets on the board for McLaren, which they needed desperately.
Oh, without a doubt they do.
But I'm curious to know how many points they would have scored, if any, had, Alonso and Valtteri Bottas both finishing the race, because those two were both primed to get points. He might have slipped into 10th place, but it's really hard to know. And, what's going on with Lewis Hamilton right now? I don't know what it is about that track, but he really just struggled for any pace.
Yeah, and during the race, he definitely looked a lot better. But yeah, during qualifying, because that was actually going to be the next thing that I brought up, is that Lewis Hamilton not making it out of Q1, I think everyone was just kind of jaw-shocked or like gobsmacked by that, going like, the 7-time world champion in a car that realistically should be competing for podiums, maybe not necessarily wins, but this car should definitely always be within the 7-2 range. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton being a 7-time world champion, I am one of the greatest talents to ever come out of the sport. You know, you would expect a lot better. Like, we haven't seen him not make it out of Q1 in quite some time, and it was just really shocking, obviously, because George Russell, his teammate, got himself into Q3 and was looking really, really competitive in the Mercedes, which is definitely not as competitive as years past. And you just kind of looked at Hamilton going like, this is shocking. Like, this is just really, really, really shocking compared to what we normally see out of him.
Yeah, last time Lewis was out in Q1 was 2017 in Brazil when he crashed. And the last time he was out just based on pure pace in Q1 was back in 2009. And that's going back to his, I think, third season on the grid.
I think it might have been his second.
Yeah, and that's pretty wild. So, yeah, very unheard of for Lewis. I'm not really sure what was going on with the car. He just couldn't seem to find any grip on the track, and it just didn't work out for him. But I think Australia has been also another track that he doesn't necessarily usually dominate at. I find that in past years it has been more Valtteri Bottas who's been coming away with wins in Australia. So I'm very curious to see how he rebounds in Melbourne in a couple weeks. But
yeah, we also haven't raced in Melbourne in a long time, so the one racer that I'm really excited to see is actually McLaren's Daniel Ricciardo, because obviously the McLaren car is not competing for wins this year. It's not going to compete for podiums.
No.
It's just competing for points. So for Ricciardo, I'm really, really hoping to see him have a really, really good race here in Melbourne. I think that's going to be crucial for him. But yeah, I'm excited for that one, because like what you said earlier, is that there's been a lot of engine issues, and I think week to week, it's probably going to be at least 10 races going into this season before all the teams and cars kind of have that reliability kind of stabilized. Obviously, it's not going to be completely fixed because it's the first year with a new car. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, there's going to be issues. There's going to be a lot of different stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see what's happening in Australia.
yeah, Hamilton only 2 career wins in Australia. Hasn't won since 2015. Nico Rosberg won 2016. Vettel in the Ferrari won 2017 and 18, and then Valtteri Bottas was the last winner back in 2019. But I've missed Albert Park. I'm ready for that race. It's weird not seeing it at the start of the season anymore, but yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, you know what? I like Bahrain being the start of the year, but I've definitely missed seeing Australia on the circuit because I really do like that track. It's one of those tracks where it combines some trickiness, but also some really, really good competitive racing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so moving forward, obviously last week when we were talking about Team Canada, they were fighting against Costa Rica for the potential to make it in. They ended up dropping to Costa Rica 1-0.
Yep.
And then on Sunday they faced Team Jamaica, and it was an absolute,
it was a madhouse. It was a madhouse in Toronto, and 29,000 fans showing up. I mean, that's
massive.
That's crazy numbers for soccer in Canada. It's more than Toronto FC can get. That's a heck of a lot more than the Toronto Argos get in that same stadium. So, and it just felt fitting. As much as they lost to Costa Rica, and everyone was super excited about that being the night, they got a chance to do it at home. Yeah. And the fact that they did it with an emphatic 4-0 win against the Jamaica squad that had nothing to play for, that felt just so satisfying, and you could tell how much it meant to the whole team. So it wasn't necessarily shocking to see them last night go into Panama and not really come out with that same intensity. They fell 1-0 to that Panamanian team last night, who also had nothing to play for. I don't know what happened to them, but the last half of World Cup qualifying, they just tanked. They looked like a shoe-in to be in the top 4. And then Costa Rica out of nowhere wins something like 5 games out of their last 6.
Which is absolutely just massive in this division, which is, I think a lot of people kind of dismiss this North American, Central American division as kind of being like almost like a walkover because, it's Canada, America, Mexico, and then you have a bunch of the Central American teams, which, let's be honest, they're not really producing some of these mega stars, for instance, like a South America or a Europe type situation. So, I think, it was surprising to see like how competitive this division got.
Yeah, Costa Rica really showed that old Costa Rican squad that made it to a World Cup quarterfinal back in 2014. It was a lot of the same players too. Like you still have Joel Campbell there and Brian Ruiz, and they've just done a really good job of adding players in. And like that, they got there not just by beating the weaker teams in the octagon either. They beat Canada. They beat the USA last night.
They've had some key victories that they've needed to win, and they've been able to go out and produce that.
Yeah, I originally picked them to finish 4th in qualifying, and even through 6 games when they weren't doing so well and Panama was staying hot, I'm like, I know this Costa Rican team. I know how strong they can be. So I was really happy to see that they made it through. Although, I mean, after watching Canada's losses to both Panama and Costa Rica, I mean, Panama's so much better as a skilled team. They're so much more skilled, so I feel bad for them that they're not going into the inter confederation playoff here. But yeah, Costa Rica, they finished 4th. They got one more chance to make the World Cup. They're going to have a 1-game playoff against, it's going to be New Zealand, who are also going to the 1-game playoff after they beat the Solomon Islands 5-0 last night. The soccer power that is the Solomon Islands. So yeah, there's only 3 spots remaining left in the World Cup. We got the draw tomorrow. Canada, they had a chance to get into pot 3, which would have given them a preferable draw for tomorrow, but they weren't able to do it. But I still think that every team in pots 1 through 3 are going to be looking at pot 4 and thinking that Canada is the absolute last team we want to play. And whoever does get drawn with Canada, I feel like is going to be potentially stuck in the group of death. The only other exception might be Wales if they make it into the World Cup with one of those last spots, because they are a really good team. And the fact that they still have to battle for a spot here with either Scotland or Ukraine is pretty crazy right now. And then I expect Peru will be the other team to get there. They finished 5th in South America. But yeah, I'm just really excited for the draw tomorrow. I don't have class tomorrow, so I get the opportunity to wake up early, have a cup of coffee, and watch and see who Canada gets drawn up with.
Yeah, so my one question for you is, if you had to choose a country to get drawn in with Team Canada, what's the one country that you really, really want to see, either competitive or not? Like, who would you like to see go up against Canada?
Well, I know that when you look at, pot 1, which is the 7 top-ranked teams in the world, and then Qatar, the host country, you would think that everyone's going to say, I want to see Canada get drawn up against Qatar because it's their best chance to potentially win a game in the World Cup and even get out of the group stage. But I want to see Canada play England so bad. I have wanted to see that. I know a lot of people think it's going to be Portugal. And, to see Canada go up against Cristiano Ronaldo
would be insane.
It would be unbelievable. It would be such a monumental moment. Or if they get drawn against Argentina and play against, Lionel Messi, or if it's Brazil and you get Neymar, there's so many amazing players that they are going to play against in this tournament. But there's something about England. I really want to see Canada-England. I think that England would cause a lot of issues for the back line of Canada with Harry Kane and just with how explosive Daniel Sturridge is, but it just seems like it would be great drama. It feels like most people I know in, especially growing up in Saskatchewan, a lot of the people I know who were big soccer fans on the world stage, they cheered for England because there was no Canada.
Yeah.
And now I've kind of always had a bit of a soft spot for when England loses. It kind of always makes me laugh a little bit. It's just because they just keep finding ways to lose, and this is
creative ways to lose.
Creative ways, but this has been without a doubt the best England squad they have put out in a long time. They are stacked from top to bottom, but I'm just excited to see Canada just playing against the top teams in the world.
Getting an opportunity to do it, because last time it was 1986 that Canada made the last World Cup. So this has been something that you and I have never seen, because we weren't born during that time to actually see Team Canada playing the FIFA World Cup.
Yeah, I've waited my entire life for this moment, and I know we were talking with one of our teachers here at SAIT, Shane McQueen, yesterday, and he says he remembers the first time that they went to the World Cup, and he remembers them getting
absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, just walked over. I mean, they held their own for almost 80 minutes against France in the first game, ended up falling 1-0, but then they
completely fell off after that.
They didn't have the legs anymore, and at the same time, I think back then they didn't have a lot of depth, so they were a team that was going to play hard for the first game, and then they were going to be tired after that. But this is
a deep team.
This is an absolutely ridiculous team. There are so many players here that they can look to who can put in valuable minutes for them in the group stage. They're not going to have to worry so much about yellow cards and having to have people miss games. I think that if someone in the midfield like a Stephen Eustáquio or a Atiba Hutchinson has to miss a game because of yellow cards, they've got Jonathan Osorio and they've got Ismail Kone waiting in the wings and who are going to be itching to get into a game at the World Cup. So I just can't wait.
One thing that I'm really, really excited about for Team Canada is that once we get to the FIFA World Cup, Canada's going to have they're going to have their top player back in Alphonso Davies, who hasn't been playing in these last, what feels like 4 or 5 qualifying games. And Team Canada has still been producing insanely well without one of the top players, not only for Canada, but from what you were saying, he's one of the top left backs in the entire world. And to have that level of talent come back to your roster, it's going to be insane.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy to think that this team was able to do the things they did in the last 2 windows of qualifying without Alfonso. They were able to go into cities that they've never won in before, like Honduras, and they were able to come away with big wins. And I mean, they were able to beat the U.S. at home, and they were just able to do so many amazing things without Alfonso. And I mean, Davies is someone who, yes, he's one of the best left backs in the world, but John Herdman doesn't like playing him at left back. He can play.
He's so versatile.
He can play almost anywhere on the field, and I would not be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised to see him playing right up top, but with just how good both David and Larin have been, it's hard to imagine that they would break up that pairing. So I would imagine
maybe midfield.
I think he's going to play left mid. I think he's going to be super attacking, and then you're going to have Tejan Buchanan on the right, Eustáquio in the middle. I mean, that's
scary.
That's a scary. And then with Atiba Hutchinson holding down the holding midfield, that is an unbelievable top 6 up there.
Yeah.
And then you've got the 19-year-old in Ismail Kone. I know he had a rough game last night, but I mean, after he plays a full season with CF Montreal and MLS, he's going to just continue to grow and get better. And the more he trains and practices with the Canadian team, he's going to just feel so much more comfortable playing in a more starting role if he gets a chance to start. But I mean, that kid's got so much potential too. So yeah, this is the deepest team we have ever had. It's the best team we've ever had. I know we're going to drop in the rankings here, but I mean, I don't think they care too much about their rankings, because when you look at a team like Mexico, they're ranked 9th in the world right now, and they have no right being ranked at that high with how poorly they've played throughout all of this qualifying. It's just the fact that they haven't been losing games. They haven't been dropping in the rankings very much. So, but the FIFA World Rankings are a joke. So
yeah, and plus, I don't think Canada, Team Canada, really cares where they're ranked. For them, I feel like they are looking at this going, we are always going to be the underdog here in this FIFA World Cup. But at this point, it doesn't really matter. We're going to use that to our advantage. I look at them kind of being almost like the Cincinnati Bengals, where everyone's kind of looking at them going like, yeah, they have potential, but they're not really going to do a whole lot, and they use that to their advantage. Last thing I'll say about the FIFA World Cup, and going back to, you really want to see England. Obviously, me being a Scotsman, I hope my Team Scotland breaks into the FIFA World Cup, because I'd love to see them go out there and kick it to the English. But so I always like seeing Team England lose, just because of that Scottish DNA in me, going back to it. But yeah, moving over to the NFL, one of the obviously biggest breaking news that came out last night, Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach Bruce Arians actually takes a step back and retires from head coaching and moves into a front office job. And then we see why am I forgetting his name off the top of my head? But they're Todd Bowles, their defensive coordinator, is moving into the head coaching job, which I think that came as a massive shock to a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely not something that I expected, especially with Tom Brady's decision to come back for another season. It seems very unusual that Bruce Arians would step down. I don't really understand the decision, but I mean, I guess he's got to do what he thinks is best for him. I don't want to make any speculations. Maybe it has something to do with Tom Brady being back. I don't know. I don't think there's really any way to know. But yeah, I'm very curious to see how this is going to work out. I'm really happy for Todd Bowles.
He's getting his second opportunity as a head coach.
I hope this can work out for him this time. And what are your thoughts?
Well, when I was reading the article last night, it said that Tom Brady was well aware this was going to happen. Either he found out the day he was announcing his unretirement, or it was the day after. But Tom Brady has known about this pretty much since the beginning of his comeback, air quotes comeback. But yeah, you know what? I like Todd Bowles. There was a lot of conversations about him being a possible head coach candidate with a lot of different teams this year. Obviously, nothing came out of it. And I think that probably ultimately ended up because he kind of knew that Bruce was trying to take a step back. We know Bruce has had some health issues in the past. He stepped away from your Arizona Cardinals in the past due to health issues and just kind of not wanting to be there anymore, and then making his return. And, I think for him moving into the more of a front office job, I don't think that's a bad thing for him. But yeah, it was definitely a little bit of a shock to see that happen. And I'm interested to see where this team goes under the direction of Todd Bowles, because now they have to find a new defensive coordinator. I'm assuming they're probably just going to promote within, because all of these head coaches and coordinator spots have kind of been locked up at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see what this team looks like under Todd Bowles, because he is a defensive-minded guy. Yeah,
it could have been a situation where they didn't want to risk losing him, and it just kind of worked out for the best. And maybe Bruce thought he had 1 more year left at most, and so rather than take that risk of losing Todd Bowles, then just give him the promotion now and step aside. But yeah, still no news on Baker Mayfield though, moving over to Cleveland.
Yeah, this feels like it's one of those situations that Baker, he's not going to have a job, it feels like, until around draft time. It feels like it's more and more now that he's going to have to be a backup for a year, which to me is kind of an insult, because we have guys like Marcus Mariota. And don't get me wrong, I think Marcus Mariota is a capable starter in the NFL, but to have Marcus Mariota be a starter over Baker Mayfield, and I just look at that and go, like, what is the NFL coming to right now? Obviously, Mariota has had his issues. He looked okay. He actually looked like he improved and learned in his time in Vegas, for those 2 years. But yeah, it's interesting to see what's gonna happen with Baker moving forward, just because we don't really know what's going to happen and where he's going to go.
Yeah, they might be, it could be a situation where Cleveland is potentially waiting to find out what the suspension length is going to be for Deshaun, and if they're going to need to keep him around just to have that secondary option, someone who can fill in, who knows the system, who can, keep the Browns in the playoff race until Deshaun's ready. So, yeah, you definitely got to feel bad for Baker. I don't really know where else he would possibly go at this point. I know we've talked Seattle. Seems like the most viable option at the end of the day. They seem more than content at the moment to roll with Drew Lock and Geno Smith. And say what you will about that combo. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but...
What a combo.
Yeah, I also...
What a combo.
I absolutely don't think Seattle has any real playoff aspirations going into this year, which could be frustrating for some guys like DK Metcalf. I know he's looking at this year with Russ gone to be the new leader of the offense, but, I mean, he's got to have someone who can throw him the ball.
Yeah, and... Yeah, I find it weird that Seattle is looking at Drew Lock, because obviously when Seattle made that trade with Denver, Denver had to send a quarterback their way, and Drew Lock was kind of one of those things where it was like, yeah, we'll take him. Like, sure, why not? He's young. He was a former second-round pick. Obviously, he hasn't played amazing, but if I was Seattle, looking at this draft class, and that's something that we're also going to talk about here in a little bit, I look at the 5 quarterbacks that are all slated to be in the first round. You have your Malik Willis, your Matt Corral, Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, and Sam Howell. To me, I don't really look at any of these guys and go, these guys are all first-round talent. Like, I think some of them are first-round talents. For instance, I look at Matt Corral and Kenny Pickett. These guys deserve to be taken in the first round. I know Malik Willis has just been impressing a lot of people, for instance, at the Combine and at his pro day. But when you look at his game film, you watch him play and you're like, he has some brilliant, brilliant moments. But he also has a lot of moments where you're looking at him going like, what are you doing? Like, his last couple games in college this year, he had multiple, games where he had 3 or above interceptions. And that's not something that I feel a really big amount of confidence in. For me, when I look at the quarterback class, every expert has a different ranking. For a lot of people, someone's 1 could be another guy's 5. For me, the way that I look at this class, I go Kenny Pickett as my number 1 quarterback.
Definitely.
He just seems the most pro-ready. Then I have Matt Corral. Then I have Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati, Malik Willis, and then Sam Howell. Again, we're going to jump into the more mock and draft class talk a little bit later. But if I was Seattle and I go, who do I want to build a franchise around? For instance, is it Malik Willis or Baker Mayfield? Baker Mayfield is still fairly young. He's no older than 27. I think he's 26 at the moment.
Yeah, I think he's only in his 3rd or 4th year, right? So
yeah, he's going into his 5th year this year. And so he's still a fairly young guy.
Yeah.
So you could still have a good 7-8 years out of him. And obviously, Seattle isn't going to be anything groundbreaking this year. So you have that 1 year of struggle. But if you have Baker Mayfield, who has played 4 full seasons of football, to me, I look at that going, you have a guy who is not only pro-ready, he's been playing at the pro, he's looked pretty decent under some really, really aggressively bad circumstances.
Yeah, aggressively bad is a really accurate way to put it. He's going to be 27 before the start of the season.
Yeah, so you can still have, like, say, for instance, you have him for another 7 years.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I wouldn't, if I'm Seattle, I wouldn't waste a first round. I'm only saying waste. I'm not saying towards the talent itself, but I wouldn't waste a first round pick on a quarterback who's probably not ready to be in the NFL yet and who you're going to have backing up Drew Lock, I assume, Drew Lock, for the first season anyways. Like, I'm sure one of these quarterbacks will be available in the 2nd, maybe even 3rd round.
Without a doubt.
And, yeah, I mean, I don't mind the idea of, Jordan loving a quarterback and drafting him for the sake of him being a backup for a year or 2 while he learns the system before he's ready to finally start. But yeah, I don't think there's one quarterback who's necessarily ready to jump under center in the NFL yet. And that's pretty rare when you come into a draft class. I mean, not necessarily that they're ready, but that they're at least hyped as ready, because there have been a lot of quarterbacks who have been touted as the next big thing, and then you get
fizzle out.
Yeah, they get drafted as a number one and thrown right into the fire right away. And for guys like, Peyton Manning, they had bad first years, and look at how his career turned out. But then you also look at guys who got drafted way too early as quarterbacks, like Jamarcus Russell. And I mean, that man was
he was horrible.
Yeah, he had all the talent in the world in college, but he was just a pure athlete, and it didn't translate into the NFL. And I mean, now look at him. You don't even know where he is. So.
Well, yeah, with Jamarcus Russell, he had all the talent in the world. He had the arm strength. He had the mobility. It's just when he got to the NFL, he didn't want to work. One story with Jamarcus Russell that I heard is on draft day, obviously the Oakland Raiders at the time, they hired a private investigator to follow around Jamarcus Russell the week of the draft just to see what he was doing. And the private investigator came back and said Jamarcus Russell, 5 days, or every day, 5 days before the draft, he was at a casino gambling. And the Raiders still decided to draft him, which is one of the biggest shocks to me, going like, you already have concerns with this guy, and then you hire a private investigator to follow him around because you're worried about these concerns. He comes back, he's like, yeah, he's gambling every single night, late into the morning. And you're like, yeah, we'll take him.
Yeah. Imagine if they were the Vegas Raiders back then. I mean,
oh my
would have
God.
just been like so much extra. But I mean, that just seems like the absolute epitome of what Al Davis was. The man wanted to win so badly. He didn't care about any of that stuff as long as the guy could help you win. That's really all that mattered to him. And that's why that's another reason why the Raiders have such a history of terrible offseason moves. And, every year it seemed to be, this guy won the MVP in the Super Bowl last year, even though he's done nothing else in his career. Let's give him a big dump truck full of money and just see how it works out. And it never works out for the Raiders. And although I'm very excited for Devontae and Derek Carter to reunite this year.
Exciting matchup being reunited with those two. One guy that I want to talk about is Baltimore Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson, because the biggest thing surrounding Jackson this offseason was everyone was walking into it going like, okay, they need to extend Lamar. And obviously when you have quarterbacks nowadays, especially young quarterbacks, you always have these guys looking for massive contracts. Obviously we see with Kyler Murray, his team putting out a statement going like, we need to get this big money. We just saw Deshaun Watson get his massive contract. Josh Allen from that same draft class got a big contract as well. And with Lamar, people are wondering like, how come we haven't heard anything? Like just a week ago, I was sitting down going like, does Baltimore not want Jackson anymore? Do they not trust him with the injury process? Because like, we're just not hearing anything about this Lamar Jackson conversation. Obviously, the NFL is hosting their, managers meeting this week, and, the Baltimore Ravens owner, who never does press conferences, he delegates all the football stuff to the GM, head coach, all that stuff. He never does press conferences. At the owners meeting this week, he had one, and someone said to him, it was like, what's going on with Lamar Jackson? And he goes, you know what? We have been in conversations with him for contracts, but every time that we try to bring up the contract conversation, he kind of pushes it to the side and go, we'll deal with that later. So it's Lamar Jackson basically pushing it. Lamar's going like, I'm going to be your quarterback. Don't get me wrong. But it's like the general manager has been kind of sitting there at the point going like, okay, we want to get this done, but, Lamar doesn't care about it.
Yeah.
This is the weirdest situation from a quarterback, because we have a guy who is arguably, when healthy, a top 15 quarterback, but is a top 5 quarterback threat just with his athletic abilities, and he doesn't care about the contract and money.
Yeah, it's that's quite unheard of for like elite NFL players.
Former MVP winner.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he took to Twitter to basically call out everyone who's trying to say that he doesn't want to be in Baltimore, and he said, "No, I want to stay here." Like he loves his Ravens. He wants to be the quarterback here, and
he just doesn't care about the money.
Yeah, he's not in a rush. I think he wants to win. Unless he's trying to I don't expect him to sign anything before the season starts. We'll see, but. Yeah, Lamar has been oddly quiet about everything, and I mean, when you look at when we're talking about quiet in the NFL offseason, a couple of teams come to mind, and that is the Arizona Cardinals, who I haven't really heard do anything, especially with the Kyler Murray situation, and the New England Patriots, who are just unusually quiet this offseason. They are seemingly just staying pat with exactly what they've done. I haven't heard really much of anything outside of them bringing Malcolm Butler back.
Yeah, with the Patriots, it's not really surprising that they're quiet because Bill Belichick is usually a guy who doesn't make a whole lot of moves during the offseason. You'll see a couple, but like this offseason especially seems super quiet. And if you look back at last year's offseason for the Patriots, they spent almost $100 million in free agents. So you're like, oh, wow, like that's very, very different for Bill. But like, yeah, like this year feels even more so quiet than what it normally is, which, I wonder if Bill's kind of getting back to that formula of we're going to build through the draft. We have Mac Jones. We spent a buttload of money last offseason, so we're just going to try to get in a bunch of these young, super talented pieces. But yeah, it is kind of shocking that they are just haven't done anything. You're not really hearing a whole lot. Yeah,
they're definitely like looking to build from within the draft, and they're really trying to build from the ground up again, like they did back in the old days of like Tom's first couple Super Bowls there. Because when you look back at those old Patriots teams, like they weren't filled with superstars. They were just a well-oiled machine. Like
there was a lot of role players.
Yeah, like they did not have your big superstar like wide receivers that Tom Brady had to throw to the whole time. Like it wasn't until I think it was the Randy Moss signing. I mean, other than that, he didn't really have a lot of huge targets to throw at. And I mean, this year you're looking at the depth chart for the Patriots right now, and who are the top three receivers on the depth chart for the Patriots for Mac Jones to throw to? It's Jacoby Myers, Nelson Aguilar, and Kendrick Bourne. And I could talk all day about how frustrating Nelson Aguilar can be. But yeah, they seem perfectly content to. I guess they got Hunter Henry. That's probably going to be his number one target now. But yeah, they seem perfectly content to just build from the ground up again. And I think they're kind of realizing that the Bills are
kind of taking.
They're kind of an elite team in the AFC right now, in the AFC East, and the Dolphins are also making some big moves. And
they've made money moves this year.
Yeah, why try to force something right now when you can just keep letting Mac Jones grow
and develop, and then have him grow chemistry with some of these younger guys. And with Bill Belichick, he's gonna find some guy working at Walmart who's some white 5'9", 155-pound guy working at Walmart to be the next superstar wide receiver in his offense. He went from
Wes Welker
to Damian Ndola to Julian Edelman,
Chris Hogan.
You just list off these guys, and when you first heard of them, you're like, who is this? But it's hilarious to see what is actually happening there. And moving into the draft conversation, because we were kind of teasing it a little bit earlier, I know when we were in class earlier today, you kind of looked at me like, how good is this draft class going to be? And this is going to be a really, really good draft class, in my opinion, not necessarily from the quarterback standpoint, but just from the top-end talent. Like, when I look at Jacksonville in my last mock draft that I did, I had them taking Aiden Hutchinson, and then I had the Lions taking Kayvon Thibodeau. Just you have some amazing edge rushers. The top 4 edge rushers in this year's class would have all been the number 1 edge rusher in last year's class, which is insane to think about.
Yeah, they are. It's a defense-heavy first round, and yeah, I know that might not seem necessarily super sexy to a lot of people who watch NFL casually, but
It's massive.
it's gonna be a very interesting draft. It is one of the ones where this is probably the first draft in a long time where the number one pick isn't a given. I feel like Aiden Hutchinson is more or less penciled in right now, but you never know what can happen. It's not set in stone. But I mean, I've looked at so many different mock drafts. I've seen Thibodeau, I've seen Kyle Hamilton, I've seen Sauce Gardner, I've seen so many different players slotted into number 2 for the Lions. And yeah, once we get past what I assume will be Aiden Hutchinson, I think it's going to be an absolute free-for-all, and it's going to be so unpredictable, and I'm curious to see how many trades we get. I'm curious to see, who takes the leap on Sauce Gardner. I'm very curious to see where the first quarterback ends up getting taken. And, I mean, if you had to take a guess right now, what would you say for a quarterback situation?
Taking a look here at the draft board, I could see Atlanta, I could see Seattle, I could see Washington, even though they just traded for Carson Wentz. I'm not a Carson Wentz believer.
No, me neither.
But, if all of these teams kind of like take a serious step back and go, we don't necessarily think there's going to be a quarterback taken super high up, I can honestly see the first quarterback falling all the way to number 20 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Even though they gave Mitchell Trubisky a 2-year, it's not a massive deal. And I could see it slipping all the way back there.
Yeah.
And even then, it's one of those situations where you could even see, for instance, the Saints go after it at 18.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Especially now that apparently Taysom Hill is going to be...
tight end.
Yeah, he's shifting over to tight end, which is... I mean, I love Taysom Hill. I am such a big fan of his. I love just how versatile he can be. But yeah, I think that's the better move for him is to switch over. But yeah, going back to the Steelers, you got Mitch Trubisky, you got Mason Rudolph. Neither one of them have ever really proven that they can be a starter in the NFL. So it could be another situation like we had kind of talked about earlier, where with the Seahawks, where it's what's the harm in drafting a quarterback, letting him sit for a bit, and just kind of letting him learn the system until he's ready to go. Because right now, the Steelers have a lot of options at quarterback right now that they could go, and Trubisky he's going to be fine. But, I mean, he's going to be fine to the tune of, like, maybe a 6-11 record this year for the Steelers. We'll see. I'd have to look at their schedule. But, I mean, with that stacked AFC, it's going to be so hard to get wins right now.
Yeah, that division, obviously, you have Joe Burrow, who I think is easily going to establish himself as the number 1 quarterback in the NFL this year. Obviously, you have Deshaun Watson coming over. Depending on how long his suspension is, we don't know. If it's like a 2-game suspension, that doesn't really matter for Cleveland. If it's like an 8-game suspension, that's a different story. But then you also have Lamar Jackson, who's coming back healthy and who has just been working his tail off this offseason. Everything I've heard is just work. It's going to be interesting. My philosophy in the first round is always, when you draft a guy in the first round, that guy needs to be able to win that job without a question.
Yeah.
Same thing with quarterbacks. So I don't like taking a quarterback in the first round and letting him sit. I've always hated that philosophy of, we're going to take a quarterback and let him sit and, develop for a year. Like, just look at what happened with Patrick Mahomes. You need to remember that Alex Smith at the time was playing at an MVP level.
Yeah.
I don't think with Seattle, with Drew Lock, for instance, if you draft Malik Willis at 9 and you were like, all right, we're going to let you sit behind Drew Lock for a year.
Yeah.
Drew Lock's not playing at an MVP level.
That's why you wait until the second round at least there. I'm looking at the Steelers schedule, and it looks like the AFC North is going to be playing the NFC South this year in cross-conference games. So, the Steelers could actually have a chance to pick up some wins and help themselves get closer towards a wild card spot. They're going to play the Falcons, they're going to play the Panthers, and then the Saints, and obviously the Bucs. And then they also get the they also get the AFC East, so they get the Jets and they get the Patriots this year, and they also play the Eagles and the Colts. So I see a lot of winnable games on the schedule for the Steelers. But I'm sure a lot of those teams are also looking at the Steelers and thinking, "Man, we have another winnable game."
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely one of those things where there are a lot of winnable games when you're looking at both sides. But yeah, this draft is going to be really, really interesting because you have a lot of edge rusher depth. You have some phenomenal corners because obviously you have Sauce Gardner and Derek Stingley Jr. both competing for that number one corner spot, and both are going to be phenomenal in the NFL. You know, Derek Stingley being a former number one recruit for college, which at the cornerback position to be the number one high school recruit is insane. And then he goes to LSU and just puts up 3 really, really good years. You know, even Joe Burrow said to him, he's like, when he came to campus as a true freshman, he said, like, after a few practices, this is Joe Burrow we're talking about. He's like, yeah, we're not going to throw to his side anymore. You know, it's like, well, like, why even bother?
Yeah.
And, you know, Sauce Gardner has just shown all year long how talented and versatile he is. And, yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how this draft class plays out. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I definitely am too. I just want to quickly rewind just while we got one couple minutes left. I'm going to go back to the Carson Wentz thing. Not a big believer in Carson Wentz, and there is something that I don't know if enough people are talking about it, but it is the North Dakota State thing, and that is the fact that he was a quarterback, much like Trey Lance, comes from North Dakota State, playing Division II college football, and I mean, there's a reason why they look so good in North Dakota State, and it's because that team shouldn't be in Division II. They should be playing Division I. And then you get these quarterbacks and these wide receivers who are playing against
no one,
who are playing against players who are not like NFL quality college players, and makes them look so good. And then in a player like Carson, he came to the NFL and had to take on these NFL defenses that are filled with players who have played in top schools and who are a lot more organized than, say, a defense from the South Dakota State Jackrabbits. So,
yeah. How many of the listeners knew about the South Dakota State Jackrabbits? And that's kind of one of the things I look at with Trey Lance as well. He put up, Madden numbers in his 1 year at playing at North Dakota State. It's going to be really, really interesting. But yeah, we are closing up here on the hour. This has been Brendan and Brett on the AIR B&B SAIT Campus Sport Podcast, I guess is what we're calling it.
We're working on a name. It's coming together.
We're piecing it together. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening.